Hello, welcome back to I Got Board Game.
Board game.
I Got Board Game. I'm Ben.
I'm John.
And today we have another Kickstarter preview for you. We are coming at this a week after, I think about a week after it's launched. And it did get a lot of publicity initially, and we want to add to that because I think it is a really nice looking game, really pretty, but also gameplay wise, I think it'll fit in well for a lot of game groups. And that game is
Flamecraft. I didn't get a picture. Flamecraft.
I'll share the Kickstarter page. Flamecraft.
Sorry for all of you who are expecting a picture.
So yes, Flamecraft is currently on Kickstarter. It's doing very well. Like just in coming to the Kickstarter page during this recording, they have funded $1 million so far.
Out of a 25K goal. So
yeah. This really blew up a lot. And I don't think it was necessarily unexpected, but I think a big part of it is even just like the look of it. When you first come to the page, it's like, oh, there's like a really charming look to the game. And then as we talk about it, we'll kind of get into a bit of what we could piece together about how it plays from either of us looking at the rules or watching some of the other videos that people have done. Especially I watched a couple videos by other YouTubers who have a prototype copy of the game. So I watched a little bit of their gameplay to get an idea of how it plays. So we'll share a bit of that, our thoughts on it, what we think really works and is good for this game and good about this game, and what we think might be maybe not work out well, or we're just not certain about how it'll turn out when the game comes out. But this game does have a week and a half left on Kickstarter. So if after this you are interested, I will include the link to this Kickstarter in the box below, description box, so you can find it there. So getting into this, Flamecraft is it says 2 to 5, but actually I think because of stretch goals, it's become a 1 to 5 game. So they've included a solo mode. And the whole theme is basically this magical world where I heard it's described as you as the players are flame keepers, or basically people who can speak to dragons. And in this world, you're going to be working with these dragons. So it's not like the big giant dragons that attack each other and such, where you're going to be working with these, I think they're called Artisan Dragons, right? These small dragons who you can communicate with and basically have them help in different shops throughout the town. And so then these dragons basically lend their flamecraft, their fire bending skills to helping, bake bread and do stuff with, jewelry, ironworks, meat, plants,
bake it, yeah.
And there's one more I forgot.
Potions.
Oh yeah, and potions. So yeah, it's very, really interesting, different take on dragons, kind of having them be little workers in these shops with you. But that's basically what you'll be trying to manage. You'll be sending dragons to different shops and then building up the town, adding more shops, while you're sending these dragons to get you resources. And one way I did hear it described is it's kind of a co-op engine building game. It is a competitive game though, to be clear, but just the way that the engine building works is kind of like you're sharing spaces while building them up together. So that's an interesting idea to the game. It's also described as worker placement, but when we get to the section that kind of goes over the different actions and the general idea of how the game flows, you'll see why I don't think it's fitting to call it worker placement. I don't even know if they call it worker placement in this Kickstarter, actually. Maybe they do right under here. Let me scroll down a little, and we'll kind of be pointing out things or inserting our comments, our thoughts as we go through some of these sections on the Kickstarter page. But yeah, so you're basically the dragons are sought out by savvy shopkeepers to craft all manners of tasty and helpful items. These dragons delight and amaze with their flame craft. And so first off to mention here is actually a lot of people have been mentioning the artwork and the style by Sandera Tang, I want to say. Yeah, the way she stylized these dragons and the kind of artwork and coloring with it, I think that's a big part of the charm of the game. And it is charming to me because I actually really like dragons in fantasy. That's like kind of like one of my biggest like fantasy favorite characters, creatures. But I don't always just jump on anything that's dragon. I think it's because it's like my favorite kind of creature. I want to see it done in a particular way.
Yeah.
And I think this cute way is also not my usual way of wanting it. But I like it a lot. I do like it a lot. I am for this kind of dragon, which appeals to different people, right? You would think it's maybe just kids, but I think it really just brings a kind of certain world and charm to it. I'm running out of different words to say, but
no, and I was basically going to say it's very kawaii, if we want to use Japanese. It's very cute, but it's also not like cutesy cute. It's it's like adults cute almost, you could even say. While it does definitely have that, like if you look at this artwork, it does feel very, very reminiscent to like children's cartoons or TV shows. But I think there's also a sophistication to this artwork too, right? Where, I mean, you can kind of look at this, it kind of feels like you could even see some of the artwork of like, you could say like, oh, it looks kind of like Clifford the Big Red Dog style, or like those like older cartoons that have like that look, but at the same time, it's not like childish, if you want to say. Where a lot of like child cartoons and stuff, it's like, it's simple. Like this is cartoony, but very complicated actually. So if you look at the artwork as it's showing here already, and we've talked about this before, but it's not just like single color tones to the artwork. It's very like the artwork is blended really well together, and you can see a lot of depth of like shadowing of the color palettes, where it's not just a single monochromatic color or like just 2 or 3 colors, but it's like shades and shades of coloring within and on, you know, all of the characters, like the hats, like even the hat of the witch that's there in the jewelry shop. Like you can see her hat alone has like 4 to 6 different shades when you look very closely at it, which is huge, right? You don't usually get that kind of artwork that well done in this space. So,
and yeah, and seeing some of the stuff like on the Bazaar here, which has like kind of this rainbow color, which is fitting for maybe this kind of dragon in the game called a fancy dragon. I think it's still fitting with the theme, right? It has that, like you mentioned, this child friendly kind of art style and the coloring, but it's also not like just blasting like random colors everywhere, right? It's like it has the right amount, I feel, to come off as magical versus overdoing it. And so, and then there also is that little bit of charm too with these kind of bigger cards will be the different shops or locations in the town you'll be working in and building up together. They all have these little kind of funny names, and sometimes they're like puns or plays on other real life kinds of shops and such. So that's a nice touch too.
And I was gonna say, like, even with that artwork, it kind of makes you feel like if I were there, that's kind of what I feel like I would be seeing, right? Like it really feels like you can kind of like immediately understand exactly what's happening, right? Like in the bazaar, as we can see here, it's like it's a big open marketplace, and there's going to be lots of things going around. So like that childlike wonder as you're entering into this new fantastical space, and you see it in the card even, right? Like the 2 kids, they're like kind of like they're waving, but they're also kind of in awe of like the display. And then like we have a nice shopkeeper here, right, who's very like, yeah, you know, happy. That's the other thing. It's a very happy game too. Like there's nothing that seems down, nothing negative as far as we've seen so far in the artwork. It's all like happy, positive vibes throughout.
Yeah, like this dragon getting to eat a giant burger, and this plant dragon taking care of that plant. And so coming down, so yes, we have different reviewers like mentioning that's kind of worker placement. Like again, we'll get to why I don't think that's necessarily the case, but or necessarily the right description. the most fitting description. But getting into what comes in the game, there's basically the standard edition and the deluxe edition, which I think the deluxe edition is limited to this Kickstarter, but it is a really good deal, as you'll see later on when we go over it. But basically you'll have a whole deck of these different shops or locations in the town. You'll have a bunch of Artisan Dragons in a deck, and you'll have some fancy dragons. All of these have increased because of the stretch goals unlocking them. Then you'll have enchantments, which are kind of like part of a certain action you can do in these locations when you send your dragon there. And then different tokens for the resources you're going to be managing, coins, which are gold coins, which are wild resources, but they also count as points if you have them at the end of the game. Player aids, and then the town mat, which I think is pretty cool. It's actually longer than what's shown here, but what's cool about it is it's either, I think, cloth or neoprene, which I think is a good idea because it's kind of a long town shape. And so it would be annoying if it's like cardboard or such and it's just folded a bunch of times to fit in the box, because with those kinds of cases, when you have to lay out the game, it might just like not be flat in a bunch of places. And so having it be able to be rolled up, stores easily. But the other thing I do like about it is, one small thing is that they put the score track in the middle of the town in a thematic way. And then these outside spots are like the shops. So you're playing those location shop cards on these halves of buildings to indicate that that is the shop that's there. And I think that's smart, because mainly putting the score track inside is somewhat different from a lot of other games where you just kind of by default will think the score track's on the outside of the board. And that's been done, like, yeah, that's the way people do it a lot. But I know like the small issue with that is like, if it's on the outside and you're always reaching inside, it's easy to maybe knock your score tracker off. And so, you lose track of where you're at. But then also putting it on the inside, it gives more emphasis to the shops that you're building up on the outside. And in a way, like, it even opens the designers up to expanding the town in a certain way, just somehow adding more shops because they're on the outside. If they're on the inside, it would be a little more of an issue in like an expansion or something to add more shop spaces, right? Because then you'd have to just make a whole nother part that includes shops versus naturally extending this board, since the shops spaces are on the outside edges.
I think it's another clever thing that you see throughout games here and there, but I wonder if this may be a kind of a future direction that they can take, is you can also now start adding like these larger cards of, like, for example, these shops that, like if in standard board games, like a lot of times they'll do like a very specific outline for, you need to put your cards in this very specific section, right? Because they fit, and it fits the best way that way. When you put it on the outside borders, you don't need to print out the entire section in which you just need to print enough of it so it's understandable. And then you can, as you were saying, it allows the designers an additional kind of way of building their cards or building whatever would go in those spots to now sit and fit in kind of this expanded way. And as you were saying, like, if you do future expansions, you can grow it and stuff, versus when you have, like, if you limit yourself to putting something around the border of your game, like a points tracker or something else around it, then you would have to design something new for the future, as Ben's already raised this point too. But I'm curious if people will start doing this more and more often, because I feel like it's pretty clever to do, and it just gives you options of being more kind of free with your kind of designs and your kind of components in the game.
Especially if it is the score track on the moving from the outside to the inside, because the score track for most games won't change. Like, a game will almost always stay up to the same points amount with another expansion. Otherwise, maybe like one case I can think of, maybe like upgraded version of viticulture or something, maybe extended the points. I'm not sure on that.
A little bit, yeah.
But some cases, then it's like, then they have to include a new board, but that's like really uncommon for the whole point range to actually change in the game. Because like the other way would just simply be like, if they already have a set points tracker is just like, let's include like 100 point tokens, so you know it's 100 plus whatever space you're on. So like that's the easy way that games try to fix that anyway without needing a new board. And so then going down to the deluxe edition, which again, it says here limited run. So I believe it might just be available through this Kickstarter. It upgrades the wooden dragon meeples to miniatures, and they're all custom. So they're all different from each other, which they look very nice here. And then you have, instead of the punch out tokens with the resource symbols on them, you have the custom wooden shapes for each of the resources and screen printed on them.
They look so nice compared to the wooden or the cardboard tokens.
Yeah, which are like all the same shape, right? They're all just a circle.
They're all just circles, little circles with the print.
Yeah, like
you can even see the shape.
Yeah,
right there. So.
Yeah, so custom wooden pieces that are still screen printed, looks really nice. And then the coins upgraded to metal custom coins. I often go for this upgrade for games. It just feels nice having something chunkier than all the cardboard you might be playing with. And then the stretch goals also had allowed them to unlock game trays, which I love. Like game tray is so reliable in just doing organization of all the components in games, and always like really sleek and such. And so I think that should be all the stuff with the deluxe edition. And then if we go down to we'll skip this for now, but if we go down to the add-ons, we'll come back to the gameplay. I think I did a little bit of quick math where like the standard version is 39, and then the Flamekeeper, the deluxe edition, is 79. But then all the add-ons are mostly those deluxe components. So if you have like the dragon miniatures, plus the custom wooden, that's already $34, plus game trays, $44. Plus $16 for metal coins, that's $60. I hope I did that math right.
Yep.
You know, that's $60 to get the deluxe add-ons. And if you add that to 39, that would have been $99 versus just $79 to get all of it, the game with it upgraded. So that's a pretty good deal. And there's a way to get a fancy dragon mini for free too, which we'll get into later, which I think is pretty clever. But then they also do have some other fun add-ons, like an art book of this amazing art by Sandera. And then they also have plushies if you want a bread dragon plushie. And they unlocked a meat dragon plushie, which I like.
Meat.
And then coasters also. And then I think the other thing they've been unlocking in the stretch goals is mini art prints. So I think those might even be free to backers, a certain number of mini art prints of all the kinds of dragon art in this game. So that's a really nice thing too, just to have. But then going back up finally to how the game plays, the general idea is this how to play section shows the kinds of actions you'll be taking on your turn. And you'll basically be using your dragon figure, your dragon miniature, to go to a town location, and you'll get to gather the resources at the top of it, and then play one of your dragons to the bottom slots if it matches the type that it requires there, like the kind of gem dragon or meat dragon or potion dragon. You can play it into the corresponding spot to get a bonus resource. And then you get to fire off or basically activate one of the dragons that are already there. And so that's one way you can take your turn, sending your dragon to do that. But then the other thing is you can basically get stuff, or you can send your dragon to a shop and enchant it, which is basically how you're going to spend the resources you're gathering. And you'll spend them to basically create an enchantment, which is a separate deck of cards. And the enchantment will allow you to get reputation points, which is what you need in the game to win. And then also fire off all the dragons in that location. So it's an interesting idea of like, you'll be moving to a location and either getting resources or spending resources. And I think that's a good, simple trade-off, right? Like basically just having these two different and basically opposite actions. It makes the game pretty easy to learn, I think. I don't know if you have anything to say on that, John.
Yeah, no, I think it's a pretty simple kind of execution. I think one of the things that'll be really interesting about the game as it plays forward. So as you can see here with the Fire Up Dragons, one thing you might be wondering is like, oh, there's a lot of dragon and it seems like they have a lot of names. Like, is there something special? So I believe all of the dragons based on their type, so like the meat dragon, the potions dragon and such, they all have the same ability in the end. So even if they have different names, like the ability of the dragon remains the same. So all potion dragons are the same kind of action. And this is specifically the Artisan Dragons, not for the fancy dragons, which we'll be getting to later, but it's specifically for the Artisan Dragons. So then I think from a play standpoint, you kind of always know and you can always see what's happening. And it's not too complicated, right? Because if every single dragon all had unique skills and abilities, this game would be a lot more complicated. And I would say it wouldn't play as well as the charm that it kind of evokes here.
Yeah, and I think what we had discussed a little before this was one of the other previews I had seen or gameplay I had seen initially kind of described this game as a good intro game, intro weight game. And they were comparing it to like Splendor and Wingspan, all of which I would say like are lighter, but more so in the family weight category.
Yeah.
But then also Wingspan is heavier than Splendor.
Yeah.
And so I think looking at how this game is, I would say it probably leans more towards Wingspan. But you do make a good point that if the dragons don't all have like different abilities, that would keep it simpler than Wingspan, which has like every bird mostly different, right?
Yeah, exactly. But and that's not to talk about the fancy dragons, which and I guess as we're talking about it here as a part of winning the game or as a part of like how you play the game, there are these special fancy dragons that are more like score conditions that, you know, over the course of as you're playing, you'll be acquiring them likely. And they'll usually have something like you have to pay a certain amount of resources, or if you have a certain satisfaction of like going to a town location that has these kinds of dragons out there or something like that, then you get to activate it where it's either a one-time bonus that you get right away, or it's something that activates at the end of the game of some kind of special score condition for you.
Yeah, so there are those fancy dragons, which are basically, those scoring opportunities. And then they're like the score or the reputation points are these heart symbols that you might see in some of these pictures. And so you'll be getting reputation points through those fancy dragons, through sending dragons to spots that get you reputation points, or even firing off dragons whose abilities might give you reputation points. And then also the resources, the coins we had mentioned before that are wild, those are all a point each at the end of the game if you still have them. And then I think the last part to notice in the how to play is, I believe it's when all 3 slots in a shop are full, then that's when you would draw a new shop and expand the town. And so I think all that together, if you can imagine, is what I mentioned as the cooperative engine building, which is also what I heard someone else describe it as. And I think that is very clever. When I read that, then it kind of clicked to me. It's like, that seems like the big clever thing about the game, right? Where it's I think maybe I can think of 1 or 2 other games I've done it. Like the main one is Charterstone, the worker placement legacy game by Stonemaier, where you're all kind of building up the town together. But then, you might get bonuses for sending your worker somewhere, or you might have to pay someone for sending your worker to their spot. And that is, I think, one of the rules in the game, where if someone sent their dragon miniature to a shop and then you go, you have to pay whoever's already there to do whatever action you want there. But I mean, it's also in saying that how I think worker placement isn't the right description in this game, because in Charterstone, you actually do have multiple workers that you send out and then have to recall to do further worker placement actions. But in this one, it looks like you just have your player miniature, your player piece, and then you have your hand of dragon cards. So, but I think the dragon cards that you end up playing to a shop, they become permanent additions to that location. They're not just your dragons at that location. And so then you're not sending out multiple dragons or miniature dragons to spots to do things, and then you need to recall all your workers. You just have your one miniature. So it's more like a, you know, I don't know, just location ability game.
Yeah, it's like signifying a particular location that you'd like to activate or like you'd like to go to. Like if you're breaking it down to game mechanics language, the reason, like we were even speculating prior to this video why they might consider it or call it worker placement for, they have mentioned you're putting a meeple or you're putting a token into those locations, your player tokens. But it could also be the fact that there is a limitation where you're not allowed to go, you can't stay in the same location. You always have to go to a new location. You can always go kind of back and forth if you really want to bounce between only one space, but like you still would have to move out and do at least one other location before you can go back to that same location. So there is a little bit of that. So maybe that's part of it. And because if you're sitting in a spot and if someone else wants to do it from a worker placement standpoint, you have to, like, there's a benefit to the player who already has their token there first. So that's maybe why they utilize that language. We agree. I don't know if there's there may not be an official mechanical term in board games specific to like this kind of style, but it does give kind of that incentive of thinking about, and this is where kind of like the heavier strategy might come into effect in this game, where while it's a light game and beginner friendly, it's this very light mechanic of thinking like, oh, well, somebody else is going to benefit if I place something on their location or something.
And that rule that you mentioned, that you can't basically just do the same location again, that makes me think of Scythe, which did that, where you have to choose a different action from your previous one each turn.
But that's also not workers, right?
Yeah,
exactly. A very different game too, right?
Yeah.
It's like an action selection.
Not basically, like, this is basically like an action selection.
Yeah.
But just shown through this kind of thematic way of like sending your dragon to a shop. But then also going off of that mechanic in Scythe and how well that worked, I think that mechanic is smart because it's simple, easy for people to learn. It's just like, you just can't stay there, right? It's not hard to remember. Your piece is there, so you just can't be here next turn. But then it also then adds this element of timing to the game, right? The strategy you're mentioning, at least that's like, I think the basic level of the strategy, right? Where if I can't stay in the same spot and do the same thing again, like I have to kind of think a bit about the order I want to do things, and then maybe eventually think about the order that I'm seeing someone else do things, right? Because you don't want to be the one who's always following someone either, because you're always paying them by following them around. And so I think that is a nice little touch with that kind of rule in this game. And so then going down, and then also the expanding the town, I think is a cool idea, because that's why they can have a deck of different buildings and locations in the town, where then it's going to be random as you play each game. You get to kind of see the different options change as you keep going, and even seeing the dragons be added to the shops and make the options there maybe even better, especially if you enchant them. The enchant action not only lets you fire off all the dragons, but they also increase the amount of resources that shop provides you. It's basically that enchanting that shop, so then the dragons there can produce more. I think, those are all little touches that I think are not hard to understand. You'll visually see it because you tuck the enchantment card under the shop, showing the icon again. I think, it shows it up here. And so then you'll get like 2 diamonds, whoever goes there in the future. I think that's a cool way of, again, that co-op building up this town, and you're making certain spots more powerful together.
Yep.
Which is different.
Yeah, and I was gonna say one final thing on this before we move on. I really like this idea of the cooperative building in this game. I think there's other games that have tried to do similar aspects of like the semi-cooperative, or what they call cooperative kind of building, where everyone's supposed to benefit. But a lot of times in those games, when you build something or you do something, it tends to be tied toward you, or you as a player. So in this game, it really is like, yes, you do get an immediate benefit for doing it, but long term, everyone will benefit from it, and everyone is going to benefit. There's no way to not. Like, there's no way to like prevent people. But that's kind of the idea of this game. It's like that's not the point, right? It's everyone is working together to grow this town, build this town together. But ultimately, right, like who built it the most? Who is the best out of it all? But everyone is truly collaborating, and everyone is truly kind of providing into this space.
And I think that's kind of what will add to like the story element of the game when you play it, right? Of like when you get into a game, you know, it's not just like all the strategy you can think of, but getting into this world, right? Not only added to by the artwork, but then the town you all are building up, you know, and you might even end up with your own stories like, oh, I really worked hard on like these places that can produce like meat or something, you know, and it's like, oh, but that's like all you care about, and where I'm not going for that with my fancy dragons and stuff like that.
I am the meat artisan. Do.
And so then going down, there are a bunch of quotes you guys can see. And then I think one of the last things I think is interesting about how they approached this Kickstarter is I had mentioned before, there is an add-on for a specific fancy dragon miniature that you can get basically like a player piece. But then what they did during this campaign, and they're still doing, if you're checking it out now, is you can win a free fancy dragon miniature for free. And the way they do it is through these puzzles that they set up. So I don't know if you want to mention this, John, because John was quite, I mentioned this to him the other day when we were talking about this, and he was staring at some of these puzzles, and I was like, are you listening to me, John?
Nope, not listening at all. Yeah, so basically it's simple puzzles in the sense of like not simple in solving them right away, but like kind of like word searches, or kind of you're getting this collection of words, as you can even see a little bit here, or you're kind of solving some kind of those brain teaser styles of puzzles, basically is what it does. So there's I think it's 6 or 7 set up puzzles for the artisanal dragons that are in this game. So basically each of them has a special kind of like puzzle where, again, I mentioned a word search, one of them. It seems like there's a couple that's kind of like you're combining kind of fragments of words together to try to create them, or like you're given a clue and you need to kind of solve this larger puzzle with the words that are already provided to you and the imagery. So the idea is you're supposed to solve one of them, and if you solve one, you send it over to them. You send it to the Kickstarter, company or the team.
Yeah. Like when you click on one, it'll take you to their like puzzle website.
Yeah.
And then you can choose which puzzle you're going to work on, and then enter your like email address and your answer, and that's what gets sent to them.
Exactly. And then if you do it successfully, as mentioned, you get a chance for that add-on. And then I think there's even a second or a special add-on, because there's another like a final puzzle or like a secret puzzle that you only get if you solved one of the puzzles. And then that gives you a chance for another exclusive special.
This was a clever way of getting basically involvement from the community. I think it's smart. I also think it's smart, like just from a campaign perspective, that they're not limiting that miniature to these puzzles, because that could be very frustrating for people who don't want to do it.
You can just pay,
it's kind of just like you can either buy it for a little bit if you really even care about having just like another figure, right? It's not like game changing or anything like that, or you could have fun if you like puzzles, and then you can get one of those.
Pay to win. I paid $5.
I will say I did solve one. I actually have trouble with these. I did solve one, but I think the one issue, or I don't know if they would watch this video, if the people managing this campaign, but I wish there was a way to know that I won or got it right or not, because it just sends it out to them, and I didn't get any response. So I don't know if that'll come towards the end when they look through all of the responses they get, and then they send everyone emails like, yeah, you got it. I'm doubtful that's how they'll handle it. So I just wish there was a way to know if I got that dragon for free, but
because if not, he needs to go back and solve it correctly.
Or I have to pay to win.
Yep.
And then there's these social stretch goals, which they've done to unlock more things, more buildings and such. And then I think Yeah, and we don't need to go through the stretch goals. They've unlocked a lot, and they're still doing more. A lot of them are like fancy dragons too, which is cool, or all kinds of dragons. And yeah, I think that's mainly. I do like. Okay, I do want to say I do like the Sendera dragon. The artist herself put herself in the game as this dragon, which is really cool looking though, the color and such. And yeah, so I think that's mainly what we wanted to go over about this game. I mean, I do just have a couple of overall thoughts on it. I'm the one thing, if I were to try to imagine what might be something that's lacking in the game, is because you're all kind of building up the shops together, and you eventually, when you get to a certain level of strategy, you'll want to predict what the opponent wants to do and kind of cut them off, maybe going to a shop before them. I think that's the part that might not have as much interaction as some people want, right? It's obviously not a direct interaction kind of game, but you do have ways of kind of making someone pay you to do, go to certain shops. But if the main thing is you're trying to go to shops and get resources to fulfill the fancy dragons or such, but you don't know what fancy dragons the person has in their hand, then it seems like you'll just have a really hard time to predict what they're shooting for, like their private objectives, right? And so in that case, the game maybe won't reach that level of strategy of being able to very clearly cut someone off or get in the way of someone's plans. It might feel more like you are still just independently playing a Euro game, basically.
Yeah, I mean, but I was gonna say I kind of feel like that's just the nature of the game too, right? So as we're thinking about it, like it is made to not be a heavy kind of cutthroat style of game, and I think it's kind of part of the appeal and the allure of it. I was actually gonna say one of the things that as we've been talking more about this game that I really appreciate, and I think why this has gotten so much popularity, is that it's also hitting. It doesn't hit on any kind of single thematic item. So like there are a lot of games where like you have industry style games where it's focused on particular industries. So like we've talked about viticulture, right? It's very specific to grape making, or like I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of other games I'm just blanking on them right now off the top of my head, but like they tend to be very kind of singular focus on like an industry or a certain activity. I think the other nice appeal about this game is the fact that it's artisanal, right? So it's hitting a lot of different kinds of stores or types of things. Like even looking at some of the artwork where we have like the meat dragon who like he loves eating. So it appeals to people who like food and like eating, right? Which is a lot of people, but not everybody likes it. But then you also have these other dragons that are doing things like the potions and the kind of the growth in the plant dragons, right? Where they're kind of really focused on like growing and plants and gardening, or like creating these complex potion, in the story, complex potions. I don't think you actually do any spell crafting or potion crafting, or like this iron dragon, which seems a little bit more kind of like tough labor, and it's a little bit harder and more gritty and sweaty, but it's like you get that kind of appeal as well. So it's hitting a lot of different kinds of industry styles, which means that it can appeal to a lot of people of like, oh, maybe I want to like, I just like the aesthetic and the look of that industry and that style. So I kind of have an attraction to it, right? And it's fun, right? It's a fun way. And it's not so intense where it's like, I am the iron maker, period, only, right? Because as we said in this game, like you're going to be moving dragons and putting dragons all over the place. And the other thing is like, you're not really actually tied to a single item or type of item that you're getting and stuff. So I think that's the other thing that also makes it really nice. It's like you don't have to be too heavily centered or focused on these things either, or it's only for, as we said, like your fancy dragon specific. And maybe you can kind of tell. I know you were saying maybe it's difficult, and it depends on how the fancy dragons are. But like if you start seeing somebody like, hey, I see that you have like 4 meats there. I kind of feel like you're going for meat there, my friend, because you have so many, right? Because you can kind of tell based on that, right? So I'm actually pretty excited for this. I think even when I first started looking at it, I was like, it's cute, it's nice. But I think as I've seen the gameplay of the game and just all of the input and everything that has been done for it, it does seem like it seems like it might be maybe one of the new big kind of family game hits, or like kind of lighter hits that's gonna come.
Yeah, I am curious to see how much it catches on after it actually comes out, because there are a lot of like 15,000 backers. That's a lot, and so it's definitely getting attention.
And I was gonna say, even like their original goal for the game was only 25K versus the million that they received. I don't think they were anticipating maybe just how popular it really became. And I kind of feel like they've been like pushing the stretch goals a lot because they've gotten so much backing. They're like, oh, we gotta keep adding more dragons. We gotta make more fun dragons and stuff. And just like, oh, now that we actually have this much money, we can make these kind of really cool components and make things more, like more. The fact that they're like making plushies, right? Like most board games, like that's not a thing that you're thinking about adding as stretch goals or things you can buy, right? So it's definitely popped up a lot in that way. So and
the plushies, I think, does a really cute touch too, like really fitting with like the appeal of the game. And as you had mentioned with the Artisan Dragons, I forgot to show you guys toward the bottom. You guys can see, and on your own you can even come to the Kickstarter page and read about this kind of world building they've done with these different kinds of dragons, describing what they do, what their specialty is, all 6 artisanal dragons, and then even getting into fancy dragons and here. And so
Jonkers.
Talking a little bit about the town. So you can read all these things towards the bottom of the Kickstarter page. And I guess for me, the last thing would be kind of with what you were saying, the look of the game. Like basically them adding a lot of game along with the look of the game, because it reminded me thinking that seeing the art, it originally could have pushed me to think like, oh, this is going to be another one of those not Exploding Kittens. I was just talking with someone about this game earlier today, the Unstable Unicorns. Like it seemed like it would just be like that kind of kid-friendly looking game, but like how much game is there really to it, but there actually is like a very solid sounding family weight game here, which I think it's really good to see. And so lastly, you guys can see that I am backing it. So I am backing this. Know that I think it said their estimate of shipping for the US is $12. So it does come out to quite a bit. But again, the deluxe version I think is definitely worth the money compared to just the standard edition. Unless you guys just really want to just try the game out in the long run, then maybe the standard one would be worth it. But value-wise, I think that the deluxe version is the way to go. And the shipping is just kind of the state of things now. I know there's certain other Kickstarters that have higher shipping prices, and everyone's kind of aware that Kickstarters starting now are going to be getting more expensive on the shipping side, unfortunately, because of all the pandemic and freight issues and such like that. But just keep that in mind. That is kind of the estimate of what it'll come out to, around like 90, a little bit over for the deluxe version with shipping. That's their estimate at least. But yes, that is our preview of Flamecraft. If you guys found this helpful, interesting, I hope you'll share this with friends, family, people you play board games with. Hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel and follow us on Instagram at I Got Board Game. And until next time, we'll see you then. Bye.
See you later. Bye.